Hello, everyone. Hey, Nadine. I am Lisa Graves, and we want to welcome you to the 5, 8.5, your midweek break. 5 stories, 8 minutes each, and a chance to refuel. We slow things down to sip, reflect, and remember you are not alone. You are not alone. We are not alone. In fact, we are gathering strength.
Indeed. Yes, we are. It's good to see you. I feel like it's been a minute since I've actually been in the co-host chair.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you. We've had wonderful co-hosts with Stephanie and with Greg, but it's so wonderful to have you back, Nadine. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Just so folks know, I have become the president and CEO of Color of Change, and I just started at the beginning of the year, and it has been a whirlwind. It has been very exciting, and obviously a lot for our organization to do in the environment that we find ourselves in, addressing many of the things we end up talking about every Wednesday in our sibling organization, our sibling show on our big sibling show on Fridays.
Yes.
The things we tackle during the show, I'm kind of wrestling with during the day. So I don't know whether that makes this my Clark Kent version of me. Anyway, okay.
Oh, you're Superwoman, Wonder Woman in both places.
Wakanda forever. Anyways, good to see you. Good to see our crew.
Yes, great to see our lovely, amazing audience of wonderful, courageous, amazing, devoted. I said amazing twice, but you are amazing twice. Now 3 times.
They are amazing twice, 2 times.
Yes.
All right. So where to start? There is so much. Here's what I would say.
Okay.
Minneapolis is such a big story that we're gonna give you 2 parts. We're gonna talk about Minneapolis at the beginning, and then we're gonna end for our section on the glass half full, because there's much to fret and feel fury about in Minneapolis, and there is so much to feel pride and emulate coming out of Minneapolis. So
yeah.
Well, I was nice. We talk about it twice.
Yeah. I was saying to my team the other day that I don't know that modern humans are built for this level of just constant visual sort of and emotional trauma that we're seeing happening in our communities. Obviously, also the things happening around the world, but I think this January, whether it was dry or not, and it wasn't dry for me. This January feels like the longest January ever. It feels sort of like, every 4 years when, is it every 4 years? When there's February 29th, it has felt like it's almost leap year. Like it's almost double January or something. This month has been relentless. And I think a lot of folks like me were sort of hoping for some reprieve, although really that was irrational because this siege had already begun in Minneapolis. It was already underway. People were trying to take their own breaks from things with, the end of the year. And then it just came roaring through with the murder of Renee Good. And then just a few days ago, the murder of Alex Preddy. And just the violence beyond that, the spraying people in the eyes, like it at, point blank range with pepper spray. We've seen over the past year, people being blinded, maimed, seriously injured by these thugs who've been recruited to harass our cities, to harass our neighbors, to engage in an array of just really disgusting actions. And part of this, as we've discussed before, is that it is the lie that Trump and Fox have been telling for years, that there's supposedly millions and millions of violent criminal aliens, roaming the streets in America, and they've got to do something about it, when that's not actually the case at all. But it's the pretext for all the things they want to do. And we're seeing in Minneapolis most recently in the last 24 hours, this sort of swap out of Greg Bavino, who was certainly doing what looked to me like Nazi, is it cosplay?
Yeah.
Not funny, but from the haircut to the sort of World War II style jacket to the posing to the the whole machine, swapping him out after he spent the weekend lying about Alex Preddy, lies that Kristi Noem and others echoed. And then swap in Tom Homan. I should call him Tom 50,000 K in a brown paper bag Homan, who Pam Bondi shut down the investigation into what sure looked like a bribe, at least to the FBI agents who were involved in an undercover operation that Homan stumbled into to take 50 grand to steer contracts their way. Those criminal charges, or the potential criminal charges, went away as soon as Trump became president or shortly thereafter. And now he's supposedly the relief pitcher for Bovino, who has a long track record of saying things that are untrue and directing actions at sort of the behest of Stephen Miller that have been deeply destructive to other human beings. And then you have documents that are coming out, like the most recently leaked document about how now we're entering phase 4 of their siege, basically, that they've planned this staged siege of Minnesota. And as we also saw this past week, there was the letter from Pam Bondi, who I don't really think should be called the Attorney General, even though that's formally her title. She's really just Roy Cohn in a modern persona, serving Trump, advancing his agenda no matter what. Where she basically tried to shake down the governor of Minnesota, Governor Walz, to say we'll get the troops out if you give us your voter rolls, which is ridiculous. Those voter rolls are not something that the government has a right to have, the federal government. The voter rolls are administered by the state and the local officials. And it just goes to show you how, this and everything else, it's always like the lie and then what they really want, just like with Venezuela. It's about drug dealing. No, wait, it's about, it is about oil, at every instance, there's the sort of mythology that they try to create. And then there's the reality. And the reality is that they want to punish a blue state and a blue city for not supporting Trump. And they want to, harass the citizens of the state, where we now have more of these ICE agents than local police combined in the metro area there in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And they're causing those troopers, those stormtroopers, are causing enormous stress on the people of Minneapolis, causing enormous damage, breaking down doors, breaking down windows, ripping people out of their cars, shoving people to the ground, just an array, an onslaught of violence by these guys who don't appear to have any sort of rules of engagement like the military does when they go into another country, and there are rules about how you treat civilians and how you deal with the combatants in a war. And instead you have guys who don't even have name tags or badges. I don't even know if they know who each other is. And then on top of all of this, you have, with the murder of Alex Preddy, in cold blood or hot blood, I don't care how hot or cold the blood is, of the killers. But the fact is that they kill him, they flee the scene of the crime, and then people like Greg Bavino and others hide his identity from the police, which I consider to be accessories after the fact to the murder and obstruction of justice. And who knows how many other crimes. I think they should be charged, including the people hiding their names, because we do not and cannot tolerate secret police in America. All right, that's the first part of my rant. I'm going to toss it back to you.
Well, I co-sign all of that. And I think, again, we have to be very clear that what is happening in Minneapolis is not a function of poor training, inexperience. They are carrying out the function they were hired to do, which is to terrorize, to brutalize. They are inciting violence, and in the absence of it, they will fabricate it, as they did with Alex Preddy, making outlandish claims that are debunked immediately by the video, the various video angles that show us precisely what happened. And so what you see now is two forces at play. One, Trump is losing part of his propagandized base that aren't going along with this. They actually believed that this was an operation about removing violent criminals. And what they are seeing with their own eyes is in the space of weeks, 2 American citizens shot in cold blood. They are seeing people, hardworking people, being snatched off the street. They're seeing children used as bait. They are seeing these things and they can't reconcile the propaganda unless they are deep, deep in the cult. And so his numbers are plummeting, and opposition to his immigration campaign is escalating because they're sort of caught in this Gordian knot. And basically, they want to inflict this. You know, we were talking before the show about, hey, where's all the castle doctrine? Don't tread on me. 2A, homosexuals who have told us for years they've been waiting for this moment where they can take up arms against a tyrannical government. Well, I'll tell you where they are. They're in ICE uniforms. They're the perpetrators of the very thing they claim to have been preventing all these years as they stack up weapons intended for war. And so we have to confront this reality, because if we don't confront it, we end up thinking that things are solutions that aren't solutions. It's not about better training for ICE agents. It's not even about mandatory surveillance cameras or the things that Senate Democrats and Congress members are beginning to debate. Well, we'll let this money through if you agree to more training or body cameras. Well, they're doing what they're supposed to do under a Trump-Miller Bannon regime. And the jury is out on body cams. What is much more effective are the cameras of the people witnessing. A super close-up that is hard to distinguish can actually muddy the waters. And of course, we know they turn them off. But beyond that, it just becomes a function that everywhere there's law enforcement, you're in a surveillance state. ICE needs to go. It needs to be disbanded. People seem to forget that ICE is fairly new in this process, and it has morphed into a private army that Trump and Miller tell over and over again that they're accountable to no one but them, that they can ignore the Constitution, that they can injure and kill with impunity. There are even reports that ICE is taking people, discovering that they have no cause to hold them, and just letting them out of cars in the middle of nowhere in sub-zero temperatures with wind chills as low as negative 55 at one point. So I think it's really important that we not allow ourselves to fall into the mythology that this is a fundamentally fine organization that is just not prepared to carry out its task. These are masked goons, a private military, a private police force that feels accountable to no one but Trump.
Right. I mean, and it's just so reckless that Congress gave them so much money as part of Trump's really not beautiful, outlandish bill last year, giving ICE more funding than the military funding of other countries.
Of multiple countries combined.
Multiple countries, exactly. And that money needs to be clawed back. These people need to be fired. We need to start over. The core of this operation has been filled with people who have not been adequately vetted for the type of responsibility that they would have in a civil setting to enforce immigration laws. And in fact, what they're doing is just anything they want. And that's because people like Stephen Miller, people like J.D. Vance have said that they have absolute immunity, or that they have immunity when they don't actually, even to the extent that there's immunity a limited amount of immunity in civil cases, which is a judicial invention that really needs to be reversed. They don't have immunity from criminal prosecution, and they should be prosecuted, and not just for the murders, but for all the crimes, all the assaults that they're committing, all the trespassing, all the violations, every single one of them that has violated our state and city laws need to be prosecuted. And if the government wants to spend its resources, the federal government, removing those cases to federal court, I think we should fight that. But even if they do, I want those cases to go to a jury, a Minnesota jury, whether it's a federal jury or a state jury. Charge them all. Charge every single one of them that has laid a hand on people who are non-violently protesting, people who are acting in dissent, people who are just driving their car to the gas station. They should be charged, and they should also be sued. I personally would like to see those suits have expanded damages, quite frankly, in the future going forward, to make sure this never happens again, where they don't get a defense of bankruptcy for their house. Like, if you use your law enforcement powers as an ICE agent or whatever is the equivalent to assault an American citizen, I want your home to be taken by the victim of your abuse. I don't want you to have, just like for student loan debt, you can't discharge that debt in bankruptcy. Let's just say you can't discharge this debt in bankruptcy. I think we should be thinking creatively along a whole host of lines: tort law, criminal law, defamation law, the whole array of things. And those could happen at the state level. I know that, there are legislative sessions going on, and there could be things that happen. There's certainly existing law that can be pursued, but I think every single one of them needs to be held accountable in our criminal and civil courts. And we also need to have the powers in Congress and have a Congress willing to impeach these people if they are not fired before we have the chance to impeach them.
I loved listening to the district attorney in Philadelphia, who said, these wannabe Nazis, just because you are a federal officer, that does not make you immune. I swear, my promise, he will not always be in office, but you will always be accountable. And just like people tracked down Nazis long after World War II, there'll be no place for you to hide.
Yeah. And there's no statute of limitations on murder. No statute of limitations. And Trump cannot pardon their asses. Yeah. Trump cannot pardon people who violate state law and are charged and pursued in state law for this violence against the people of Minnesota and other American cities.
Hear, hear. Well,
all right.
Well, this is sort of related, that we segue into, what this Department of Homeland Security memo actually claims, because we're talking a lot about Minneapolis. This is not just about Minnesota. This is an all-out attack on all of our rights right now. The memo basically says ICE claims it can forcibly enter homes and arrest people using an administrative warrant rather than a judge-signed warrant. They are completely attacking our most basic constitutional rights. And Lisa, you've written, I hope we can drop your latest Substack in the chat as you talk more about, actually you used a word I haven't, ruffians, which a word that isn't used often enough. So yes,
the paramilitary ruffians. I thought about using thug because thug has a similar meaning in terms of violent actors, but I just felt like ruffians, even though it was a little too multisyllabic perhaps to have paramilitary ruffians, but ruffians really seem to fit the bill. People who are sort of hyped up to engage in violence, people who are bullying others, people who may be involved in criminal activity, may not be involved in criminal activity, but they are brutish and they're using force against other people. And so I wrote about that. And in my piece that went up yesterday, I actually wrote it at 5:00 in the morning on Monday. Couldn't sleep with everything else going on with that, mourning Alex Preddy and seeing the beautiful gatherings of Americans and citizens and immigrants, standing together, being united, and people helping people who couldn't leave their homes, making sure people have food, who are afraid to leave their houses, making sure that kids are being watched and cared for in the midst of this siege. But this memo that was just leaked just this past week, it actually dates to May of 2025. So secretly since last May, shortly after Trump was sworn in, DHS issued a memo to its agents asserting that they don't have to follow the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that we have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. That specifies with particularity the person, places, and things to be searched and seized. It's a pretty good paraphrase. I think I got almost all the words from memory. And that Fourth Amendment was written specifically because the Redcoats had used a general warrant. Basically, they had claimed a right of so-called writs of assistance that let them break down the doors of colonists, search through their papers, their bedrooms, their houses, seize people on claims that they were trying to collect taxes or customs. And those the arrogance of those agents, the brutality of those agents was so present in the minds of those white colonists, but not only white colonists, because the first person who was killed at the Boston massacre is a Black American or Proto-American, Crispin
Attucks.
Yes, Crispin Attucks. And he was standing up along with his fellow citizens against this brutality by these soldiers. And so one of the things that happened after the colonists won the war, after they had this sort of failed Articles of Confederation, was when they wrote the new Constitution. They the people who were going to ratify that Constitution, including people of Boston and Massachusetts and across the country, didn't want just a Constitution that laid out the powers of the federal government. They wanted a Constitution that made it really clear that there could be no writs of assistance. There could be no general warrants that were issued basically by the executive, the king's men, in essence, to do whatever they wanted. And we had to have a Fourth Amendment. And that was a condition of the ratification of the Constitution, which, as we know, was not a perfect document and had some deep flaws, in particular the 3/5 clause and the allowance of slavery. But it did have a promise that for searches and seizures, there would have to be a warrant. And so this memo by a man named Todd Lyons, who was the acting head of ICE at the time, told all of ICE that they don't have to have warrants. They can break down people's doors, and asserted that they could just use a so-called administrative warrant, which is not a warrant at all. I don't care what they label it.
Right. It's like a permission slip that they've written for themselves. Anyone who brought a permission slip from home when they were in school and signed it in their mom's handwriting, that, yes, if you can enter a home without a warrant signed by a judge as a check and balance on government power, then you've gutted the Fourth Amendment. Yeah. And the thing is that there have been exceptions to the Fourth Amendment that judges have created. Like if for example, in the case of an emergency, if the police are nearby and someone is screaming out for help inside the house, they say that they can, the law allows them to break in the door to protect someone's life, but they don't have a right just to go entering someone's home without a warrant, without an independent judge signing off on that warrant. Now, even when a judge signs off on a warrant, it doesn't mean that the warrant is perfect. It doesn't mean that the person committed a crime, but at least there's someone besides like themselves saying, yeah, let's just go do this. And in this instance, the administrative warrants, it doesn't even appear that they even have so-called administrative warrants. One agent is on tape claiming he has an electronic warrant. Doesn't exist. You have to have a piece of paper that the person whose house or business you're searching can inspect, look at, make sure that they have the address right, that the name is right. They don't have that at all. I don't think that for the doors they're busting down when they were going door to door to door in neighborhoods, just like when they
you know, flew into Chicago and like busted through the apartment building. They didn't have warrants for each of those houses, whether it was an administrative warrant or not. There's no such thing in American law of the type of behavior that they claim that they have authorized themselves to do. It is an enormous threat. And again, this is a situation where it's like, where are the don't tread on me people? Where are these supposed patriots? I call them, in the words of Thomas Paine, summer soldiers who have used that rhetoric for years to try to defend their efforts to just stockpile weapons, to try to defend against common sense public health measures in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, to try to prevent the spread of disease in COVID, to claim that having a cloth on their face was tyranny. And yet, where are they when we are seeing tyranny in our streets perpetrated by the federal government? And quite frankly, you know, I'm someone who spent about 5 years of my life working intensively on civil liberties in the context of national security. So looking at the Patriot Act and the NSA warrantless surveillance of Americans that happened after September 11th, looking at the rules. I testified against the FBI, the NSA, DHS. I rebuked Bob Mueller when he was the head of the FBI to his face for some of the practices that the government was engaged in by, you know, through the FBI in terms of surveilling Americans who had done nothing wrong. And in the process of this, I have looked at the definitions of terrorism and domestic terrorism, these words that get thrown around. And the reality is that there are crimes of violence that are intended to terrorize people. That is really what domestic terrorism is. And by that definition, there is no doubt in my mind that the forces active in Minnesota, disrupting the peace in the community there, are violent forces designed to terrorize the people of Minnesota and other states.
Yeah. I mean, listen, we're dealing with, I saw today, I think a Ranger, a veteran of multiple deployments who is in Minneapolis right now, speaking out. And he said, you know, I'm here because I took an oath to defend the Constitution and it's being shredded. But he said the very things we deployed in other countries have now come home to roost. And what is uncomfortable for our country, even those of us organizing to push back against this tyranny, is that we're also having to dismantle the mythology of America. Like the mythology that has us making comparisons to Hitler when there's so many more homegrown examples of this kind of brutality. In fact, in our history, Hitler looked to the United States as he built his final solution. He looked at the treatment of indigenous people. He looked at slavery. I believe, and somebody fact checked me, that he had a picture of Henry Ford behind his desk. You know, we are not. This is not an aberration. This is like Pennywise. This is a part of American history that recurs when we get to a place where we forget that history, or we too easily embrace the mythology of a much more complicated history. We want our history to be evil guys and good guys instead of the murkier picture that, you know, one of the most chilling parts of going through the African American History Museum is a section where there's a pastor writing to his wife, and his wife has clearly raised ethical concerns about him engaging in the slave trade. And he acquiesces to all of her points. He's like, you're right. You know, it is hard to reconcile with our faith. It's hard to reconcile with this. And the end of it is essentially, oh, but the money is too good, right? That is a better encapsulation of our history, that where there's an opportunity to exploit people, you know, because yes, they want to deport a lot of people, but mostly they want the people who are here to live in fear with a sense of precarity. They want to functionally turn immigrants into slave labor for major corporations who have no place to turn, who, if they disappoint or in any way displease their bosses, their entire family can be removed from the country perhaps to gulags in other countries. We have to really dismantle the myths that have comforted us, the simple story of America, in order to understand and to fully grasp what is going on, because there's a sense of disequilibrium when you realize so much of what we thought of as our democracy comes down to a gentleman's agreement, and we have somebody who will not abide by those norms, and we're watching them be dismantled. And we have to stop treating this administration as though it is a legitimate government.
I mean, the fact is that you have a president who was sworn in, making an oath that he was going to uphold the Constitution, even though John Roberts, the man swearing him in, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, had just given him immunity from criminal prosecution, which is the essence of not being bound by our laws, not being held to account, being treated as above the law for his actions. Anything that is a so-called official act is somehow under the words, the magic, claim of John Roberts, beyond the reach of the law. And that birthed this presidency, that birthed this regime. Yeah. And then Roberts and his fellow Republican appointees have spent the last year overturning order after order of lower court judges following longstanding law, showing that this administration had violated our rights, constitutional rights, statutes, regulations, rules, contracts, that the government, the Trump regime has been violating longstanding measures designed to protect our rights. And those judges issued temporary restraining orders saying, look, there's irreparable harm if these practices are allowed to continue, including racial profiling of people by ICE. And this court has intervened, this Roberts court has intervened to allow those actions to occur, basically giving Trump, the go-ahead to put his foot on the gas, and allow these other people to put their boots on the throats of our fellow Americans. And that's what this Roberts court has done. It paved the way for Trump's return, and then it emboldened him further. And I just think the fact is that, we would not have these assertions of immunity but for Roberts. And then we have the pardon power that Roberts also tried to insulate from any legislative or judicial review, even though it's obviously desperately in need of reform, given how Trump has abused it. But that the combination of Trump being above the law and then having the power to pardon people, in essence, setting them above the law, even as they transgress our rights, is unprecedented in American history. Now, that doesn't mean that there is not a history, as you've described, and my friend Clarence and so many others have described, about, the ways in which our country has fallen short on the promises of the Constitution, the promises of the Declaration, over decades, the Jim Crow laws, the racial apartheid in America, the anti-immigration sentiment that Hitler drew from, along with anti-Semitism and more, the Nazis, at Madison Square Garden. But there had been progress. There has been progress due to the Civil Rights Movement, due to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act and other measures that have, tried to help America live up to its promise. And these guys are determined to rescind it all unilaterally by fiat. And so it is a regime that is engaged in lawlessness. And that memo by Lyons saying that they've just decided that they don't have to follow the Fourth Amendment, that's not how this works. That's not how it's supposed to work. And we cannot allow it to be normalized.
Now, while I have taken the Second Amendment, rise up against tyranny folks to the woodshed for their lies, their hypocrisy, the thin veneer of respectability they've tried to put on, the position they actually take, which is, we don't care if kids die. We don't care if guns are the number one killer of young people under the age of 18. We like our guns. They make us feel big and strong. And, the NRA, we're in this interesting moment because the coalition, Steve Bannon, who has said publicly, if Republicans lose the midterms, he's likely going to prison. And he was saying to a room of donors, a lot of people in this room are going to prison, starting with me, right? So the level of desperation that they're experiencing right now is really quite, like, there's no guardrail left whatsoever. But the strategic bet that they are making has created a wedge between the Trump White House and the MAGA media, where you have Bannon saying, damn the torpedoes, kill more of them, essentially. And, you know, the problem isn't that you have 300, ICE agents in the heart of Minneapolis. It's that you don't
3,000.
have.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Yeah.
he was just talking about at that particular location.
Yeah.
It's that you haven't engaged completely. You should be outnumbering the crowds there, not just the police force there. Like his view is, you respond to this with even more force, while the White House is going, we're hemorrhaging support. We are losing. I mean, the NRA chastised the White House around Trump's rhetoric about guns. A lot of people have been posting the Kyle Rittenhouse, brandishing a semi-automatic, a Sig Sauer, I think.
And then being feted by Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago and more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Alex Preddy had a holstered, registered weapon. So these fissures are emerging, and they have competing strategic bets, which is Trump thinking he can put a nicer veneer on it, and that by demoting and removing Bovino, it will allow him to spin this, while the Bannon wing is saying no, literally saying that's the equivalent of taking a knee, and once you do that, you're going to have to keep taking a knee, because his bet is, if we don't crush the opposition completely, we're doomed. And Trump seems to be weighing, have I gone too far too fast that I'm losing 3-time Trump voters at this point? And he is. They are beginning. I'm not telling you that they're going to the protest, though some are, but there are a lot more people leaving MAGA right now and saying this far was too far.
Yeah. And you even have the International Association of the Chiefs of Police objecting to what's happening. You have the police in Minneapolis standing up and saying this is not okay in our community. You have the National Guard in Minnesota being deployed to try to provide some protection for the protesters. You have an alignment happening against this tyrannical action that is transpartisan, that is engaging people who have not been engaged in politics, who weren't paying attention in Minneapolis and other places, to see like what is actually happening before our very eyes, from a president who at his first inauguration claimed there was American carnage. And now he is making that dark vision real for America. Yeah. And doing so in a way that is like, not that this should be happening in Texas or anywhere, but targeting Minnesota, that actually has a relatively small population of immigrants, but a population of immigrants that have been really integrated into society there, in a significant part of the workforce there, and embraced largely by the people of Minnesota as part of like a moral duty to help the people of Somalia who were fleeing a war-torn country, just like Hmong residents were embraced, by Minnesota and Wisconsin. Obviously, there's still racists in both, states. It's not as though everyone was fully embracing these immigrants, but it is such an attack on the community and neighbors, and people can't even go out to get a cup of coffee. They can't. They get accosted to filling their car up with gas to get to their job, because these guys are everywhere. These ICE people are everywhere. Anyway, okay, so I move the agenda along to move up the erasing history part. And my segue there is, if you haven't seen it, to see the outrageous video of one of these ICE marauders telling a protester that if he raises his voice, he's going to erase him. And we've
Yes.
seen other reports of agents saying, "Didn't you get the lesson from Renee Good's death? You know, that you should just sit down and shut up." And you've had some people on the right, like Megyn Kelly, who is just a ridiculous ghoul at this point. Not that I ever respected her opinion, but like her statements about this and everything else are just so desperate, so thirsty for fame.
Oh my
But you
gosh.
have, you have.
She's the one saying that, don't get so upset about pedophiles. I mean, she was, we're talking 14 and 15-year-olds or whatever, she's grotesque.
Just grotesque. But, so we have this erasure, this effort to erase people, or to erase our First Amendment rights, our right to dissent, to erase people for daring to speak up. And then we have a different kind of erasure that is happening, that's being perpetrated again by these vandals employed and deployed by Trump and his minions to literally remove the actual documents or, descriptions of our history from state and city facilities, as well as federal national parks. Like what's happening, what happened in Pennsylvania, to see these arrogant jerks standing there thinking that they have a right to rip down the posters that were, affixed to the wall to describe America's history of slavery, that they get the arrogance of these guys, that they think that they have a right to remove that and destroy that investment, in essence, in those posters, in telling that story. It's just so, it's so outrageous, among the many outrages that we see.
Right.
So Nadine, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it is simply it's emblematic. It is a physical representation of what's happening in lots of ways that are not visible. We are seeing the dismantling of memorials. We are seeing the erasure of, the Tuskegee Airmen exhibit. We're seeing the erasure of the hidden figures, the Black women within NASA who were critical to, space exploration. We are seeing on social media, which is increasingly owned, whether it's Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, or now we're seeing Twitter. I mean, not Twitter, TikTok, completely in the grip of the MAGAverse and throttling content by many, many estimations. And so what was, watching federal workers remove a slavery exhibit at the president's house site in Philadelphia is so jarring, because you're actually witnessing them. This National Park Service managed historic park where Georgia Martha Washington lived back when Philadelphia was the nation's capital. So you see them taking down informational panels that told the story of the 9 people enslaved there, and was very honest about the paradox between, I cannot tell a lie, I cut down the cherry tree, even the Lin-Manuel, Hamilton play, it's like, okay, this is not just an enslaver, but a brutal enslaver, right? And so that exhibit has been up for it went up in the early 2000s.
Yep.
And so, but the reason that they acted was, this is the Trump executive order directing federal agencies to revise or remove historical displays that Trump says inappropriately disparage Americans, or basically conflict with his preferred narrative, the myths of U.S. history. And when he says inappropriately disparages Americans, that is translated to make some white people really uncomfortable, to confront the distance between the sanitized, partial history they were taught with just a few drops of the conversation, what Howard Zinn would describe as it would be too much not to talk about slavery because it's such an obvious part. But what they do is they make the most glancing kind of reference, as if to say, yes, it happened, and it was a terrible thing, but not all that important. And so here you have Trump basically saying, we will dismantle all of the conversations, all of the images, all of the things that create in people an awareness of the distance between the myths we sell you and the reality of America. And until we confront the gap between, until we deconstruct these myths, we will continue to have this asymmetrical warfare where we're talking about the spirit of the Constitution and the founding fathers and living up to the promise. And they're going, these tools are really good for breaking things and killing people. Right.
Yeah.
This is racism made policy. His entire goal is to dismantle all of the progress made, Reconstruction forward.
Yep.
And he is turning agencies on their head. So agencies designed to address the ongoing reality of racial discrimination are actively saying, hey, if any white men feel like they haven't been treated fairly, send us your stories. Thankfully, the Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro, has joined the lawsuit calling the move an attempt to rewrite and whitewash history. And we need to call it that more often. We need to call it exactly what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you see this happening in all these other ways, which is that this administration, this regime, is trying to use the power of the federal government to censor the views they don't like, to punish people who dare to speak out against them, like Jimmy Kimmel and others, to use the FCC to perpetuate that. Where are these so-called conservatives who were, so concerned about freedom of speech, and yet they're not speaking up, they're not weighing in on these moves, and they've been happening now for over a year. The attacks on diversity and education, the efforts to shake down universities, law firms, and more. And also this notion that the government, a longstanding constitutional set of precedents about the government is not supposed to engage in viewpoint discrimination, not supposed to be like choosing sides in an array of issues, particularly in the communications area. And yet they're doing this too on a mass scale basis. And so, you just have an not just a lack of adherence to rules, but you have an active disregard for those rules, those practices, those precedents. You have an active, aggressive dismantling by Trump and his minions. And it is just another one of the series of acts of vandalism by this administration. Now we're going to just switch gears slightly to a different kind of vandalism, which is, Trump's destruction of our U.S. economic policy, his ridiculous tariff policies that have disrupted the American economy and imposed enormous costs on the American people. And Trump was just in Iowa within the last 24 to 48 hours. And there he was telling Iowa farmers who, had faced massive strains because of Trump's retaliatory tariffs. Iowa is a bit of a monoculture state in terms of some of its agriculture. It has, or maybe it's a Pluto sort of culture, but basically there's corn for ethanol, there's soybeans, and then there's some food crops, for the pork industry in Iowa. And those Iowa farmers relied heavily on exports and the price of exports and actual exports to China. Because of Trump, the soybean sale to China dropped by, I think it was like 65%. The farm bankruptcies surged, I think up nearly 40%. And then here comes Trump going to Iowa saying, hey, we sent you some checks. I sent you some checks. He should never says we. I sent you checks. I got you money. Thank me. And basically forced them to applaud. Some people applauded, I'm sure, voluntarily. But it wasn't Trump saving them. It was Trump creating a disaster for them and then using our tax dollars to try to make them like him or appreciate him or owe some sort of fealty to him, for giving them some funds to make up for the losses that he caused, which, as you know, Nadine, and we were talking about, is part of his whole shtick, to break something and then claim to be the guy who fixes it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I've been trying to figure out how farmers keep standing with Trump, you know, whether it's beef farmers or Trump's first era tariffs, you know, hurt the Iowa farmers because they were targeted by foreign retaliation. China used U.S. soybeans as a leverage point. You know, a crop Iowa is heavily dependent upon, you know, and there's a way that you go, oh, wow, farmers lost billions in export markets. But at the same time, it is very much a bailout. You know, they talk free market, but it's also hand me a check. The system that our farming is under. I mean, it's what's so infuriating about, you know, talking about, you know, oh, they're gaming the welfare system. Well, you know, dig deeper into how the farm subsidy system works.
Yep.
And this is why so many farmers were upset at USAID being disrupted, because that was a big paycheck for them. That was, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get to here is that system is very broken, and the idea that Trump says, whatever I do, I'll just fix it. You know, it's free market rhetoric and send the checks policy when it comes to farms, especially the giant, you know, this handout dependence is overrepresented with the largest farms. And really, you know, the idea of the independent small farmer just holding on to granddaddy's farm in these circumstances is really the rarity. It is these larger farms that have become so accustomed to these subsidies and bailouts that they keep supporting a system, knowing that when they break things, a check will be coming.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and on big agribusiness, it's interesting because there are a number of products that get promoted. This is a family-owned company. I'm not going to name this one or that one, but, you know, some of them are. They're family-owned by multi-millionaire families that have gobbled up all the local farms around them, and are really part of this big agribusiness, really tied into the pesticide manufacturers and to some of these other operations. You know, there's been just massive loss of small family farms going back to the 1980s. And you can drive through Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and you see these cut-ins, basically where there used to be a road from the, you know, a driveway from the main road to the farmhouse that used to be there. But now what's left is the field, because the farmer is no longer farming it. And in fact, the equipment costs for some of these farming operations, or the cost of these huge tractors, is beyond the ability of any ordinary small farmer to do. And that agricultural policy, that policy that has led to this massive consolidation, this massive agribusiness, has decimated, you know, family farms, that legacy for many, in fact, most family farms. And so there are massive reforms that I think should happen there. And there are ways in which regenerative agriculture, in which organic agriculture, you know, could restore the life of being a family farmer, but not with the way in which the government has put its thumb on the scale in terms of consolidation, and the other policies, both the export policies and more, that have driven that, along with the tax policy that has driven that as well. So there are reforms, but I just, you know, just the gall, the just ongoing unmitigated gall of Trump to break, you know, a system that, you know, far from perfect, really, you know, has lots of problematic things, but, you know, the market as it was in terms of the agricultural planning, the soybean market, break it, and then write checks in our name, basically, to try to get credit for fixing something he broke. It is just the game plan over and over again. Yeah.
And that money's not getting to the farmers that we think of as small farmers.
Yeah. It's really, it's amazing. Okay. So
Whew.
Our
What do we
last
got
topic.
left? Our last
Our last
topic was
topic. Yes, we decided to call this the I Didn't Get a Nobel Peace Prize board. That was Nadine's suggestion, because I could think of something to call like piece of cash, piece of gold, whatever. $1 billion to join the axis of evil, basically, that Trump has tried to create. It was almost like when you saw the authoritarian countries that were lined up behind him at the ceremony. It was almost like when when I was growing up and we had the cartoons about Superman and all the heroes, Flash and others who were trying to deal with the bad guys of the world. It was like it was like an assembly of the countries that have really terrible human rights records, ponying up, giving him $1 billion to be on the so-called peace board. A man who does not seem to know the meaning of the word peace or doesn't care about Peace Prize. I think while you were away, Nadine, and we didn't talk about this, Trump accepting the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize that was given last year, and with that glare, this that he's dominating her in getting it, and he as if he deserves it. And the great internet memes that came out of the FIFA Peace Prize, and that's like, people wanting to in their
bowling trophies. If I give you my bowling trophy, will you stop invading countries?
Yeah.
But I think he's never looked weaker. It was pathetic. It was a pathetic sight to see, and it of course is a perfect metaphor for the ultimate stolen valor president. And but I think one of the things you were saying that this the Board of Peace is the name, right? And it's this newly created. Trump is the chairman with no fixed term limits. Holds broad authority within the organization. Membership invitations are personally controlled by Trump. Countries can join and serve a 3-year term without payment, but permanent membership requires the $1 billion. And just to make it extra gross, Trump, in inviting Putin, Putin said, yeah, put me down, but use the frozen assets that, the assets that the U.S. froze because of my invasions and, war criming, to offset my membership fee. And Trump said, no problem. I mean, it's just, so yes, so you've got this mix of Middle East, Asian, Latin American countries have signed on, while, France and Italy and the UK, traditional allies of the US, have all said, no, thank you. But you can see the pressure being brought to bear, right? So it's the official description is that it's there to promote stability and peace in conflict affected areas. Talk about the fox guarding the henhouse. But yeah, this is Trump's modus operandi. Can I monetize this? Pay to play, a diplomatic model. If he can't monetize it, he's not very interested in it. And of course, everybody should be watching very carefully about what this Board of Peace is doing when it comes to Gaza, because this is supposed to. They're talking about the reconstruction of Gaza, and this from an administration that sent out this wild AI video of casinos and hotels and the Gaza Riviera. I mean, all of it is such a dystopian nightmare. But yeah, at the moment you think it's as appalling as it could possibly be, they sink to another level of depravity.
There's just no bottom. There's just no bottom. And I was looking for like Spectre. Thanks, Croc Locks, for putting that in there, because I was like, it was like this assembly of these leaders who are other strongmen saying that they're going to join his Board of Peace. And this is in the aftermath of his interview with the New York Times, in which he said he has no constraints on anything he wants to do internationally. He can do anything he wants, and the only limit is his morality, which appears to be, non-existent on most hours of the day. Just, in its place is this selfishness, this extraordinary black hole of demand and need, and this desire to dominate other people. And I mean, it is the case. Like, let me just say, like, it is not as though he's invincible politically. He obviously lost in 2020, despite his inability to accept the truth. And on the tariffs, Wall Street labeled them taco tariffs, that Trump always chickens out. I'm hoping that that's the case on our domestic policy in terms of,
Yeah.
what's happening in our cities, because I do think that bullies respond to strength, and the power of nonviolence that the people of Minnesota have demonstrated is a real sign of strength and solidarity. And that, that is an enormous power. It's the most effective power there is. While Trump is trying to, or at least some of his minions are trying to generate a civil war or an excuse to go in with greater violence, the people of Minnesota are refusing to give into that and are standing together nonviolently, and notwithstanding ridiculous claims by some of these right-wing legislators that blowing a whistle is somehow, should be conditioned for being beaten or killed. That's not the reality that we can accept. And the more people who stand up non-violently together, the more powerful we are. And it is the case that Trump seems to, I don't know if the word is respect power, but he certainly responds to power in the way that a bully responds to someone who's exerting power to push back. And that nonviolent power is powerful.
Yeah, I think that's why people were shocked his response to Mamdani, where he was deferential, because Mamdani exuded the confidence of someone who went from a dark horse candidate to, a clear winner in a diverse field. And I think you're right about that. But I do want to say this about the whole Trump always chickens out. Again, I will sound like a broken record, but that's if you're looking at it through the lens of an actual president governing a country.
Right.
I guarantee there are back channels through which he got what he wanted.
Yeah.
Because it's always a shakedown.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he doesn't really care what he does to the economy as long as he gets paid. But I'm glad you began to talk about what is, once again, we return to Minneapolis, because it's sort of the river that has run through all of our conversation tonight, but it is also the subject of our glass half full, because we know that it is important for us to pause and reflect, and to look at the things that are still amazing, still beautiful, and still inspiring. And Minneapolis right now is all of those things. I had reason to reach out to an amazing woman on the ground in Minneapolis, Nicole Badera. She's a sociologist who studies violence and how communities respond to state force, and she's the author and co-founder of Beyond Compliance. But really, she's been one of the most visible people explaining community responses to ICE tactics in Minnesota, including the amazing volunteer effort known as ICE Watch. And, I was talking to her between the killing of Renee Good and days before the killing of Alex Preddy. And the thing that really warmed my heart, she said, rather than back away, people have surged forward, that there are more people stepping up in the community in the aftermath. And what I found really, because I was saying, are these people who've never been active before? She said some of them, but you have to remember that we learned so much during George Floyd, the aftermath of his killing. Mm-hmm. And those same people have stayed together, continued to organize, continued to, educate themselves on confronting racism. She described a a group that I think they called Stitching and Bitching, which is sort of a collective of white women who were, dismantling racism and formed a study group. But so many of the things put in place in the aftermath of George Floyd have now continued to grow. And so I said, are the whistles like just ever present? And she said, it's different. It can be eerily quiet between these sudden bursts of activity. And she said, and people are just finding new ways. It is so cold. I think it was negative 55 wind chill. Yeah. She was saying there are people who are learning to use their key fobs to trigger their car alarms. But she said it is not, it's not uncommon when ICE is engaging, in the middle of the night and deploying to kidnap people. She said you can see people running out in just their robes and house shoes because there's no time. And so, for me, the glass half full has been the amazing groundswell. The images from Minneapolis of people crowding into the street, overwhelming the presence of ICE agents, and then the solidarity that's happening. She was describing that people are delivering groceries, they're shoveling for their immigrant neighbors, they're hanging out at immigrant-owned businesses at closing time, just so that they can be there for moral support and to witness. And she sent out advice to other cities, and her advice was deepen your relationships now. Form small groups that can act together, build routines that you can pivot into action, and support the existing organizations that can build the framework of what they have in Minneapolis. And the good news is we're already seeing that. We're seeing it in the solidarity marches all across the country. We're seeing it in the increase in calls for businesses to do shutdowns as they did. Thousands of businesses in Minneapolis that shut down in protest. And so what the glass half full for me is the groundswell that is building every single day, so much so that Bovino was removed from Minnesota and sent to a desk job. I don't know whether he's going to retire, whether he's going to be back, but the fact that they had to do that, the fact that they've had to back away and from the lies they told, because there's too much video evidence of exactly what has happened. But more than anything, it has been the people of Minnesota pouring into the streets, putting themselves in harm's way to protect their neighbors. And if there's any way through it, Minneapolis has been showing us the path. So our glass half full tonight goes out to Minneapolis and the brave people on the ground who told ICE, we will not be afraid. And when you come for our neighbors, you have to go through us.
Hear, hear, to our beautiful Minnesotans and the extraordinary creativity, the resilience out in the freezing weather, all the songs that are being sung and being renewed. And songwriters joining in to support Minnesota, to support America.
Yeah, the boss, Springsteen, came out with a song. If you haven't heard it, check it out. And then Dave Matthews.
Yep.
So, we're at the part of the revolution where we start to get some good music. So
yes.
No kings, one boss.
Yes. No kings, we the people. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. There is a show this Friday, the 5/8. You know it well. Please please sign in, join in, support it, subscribe and like and share. And Nadine, it's a joy to have you back, even to have these conversations about these really, really, in many ways, disheartening topics, but to shine a light on them and then to shine a light on the causes for hope. So with that,
see you next week, everybody.
See you next week.